The bouncer laughed at the librarian, then she left him staring at the ceiling. I was halfway down the queue outside a Shoreditch private club when the bouncer laughed at me. Not a chuckle, not a polite wheeze, an unbothered, whole-chest sound that fogged the November air and rang against the brass letters above the door. "ID, Miss Storytime?" he said, eyes grazing my cardigan, my sensible boots, the cotton tote bag with the Holborn Community Library logo. Or maybe a return slip'll do. The sign over his shoulder flashed "Meridian" in a steady pulse. People with sculpted hair and polished watches shuffled forward past the velvet rope, perfume and cologne rising like a carefully arranged mist. I could feel the sweat on my palms despite the cold. My name is Mara Whitlow, and if I'm the librarian in this story, that's only half the truth. The other half is that there was a 15th century book of hours inside this club that belonged to my readers, to school children who held their breath over illuminated margins, to pensioners who visited every Thursday just to sit among the manuscripts and feel less alone. It had been stolen from special collections 2 weeks ago and resurfaced in a whisper I caught when I wasn't meant to hear it. Tonight, the whisper said, it would be sold. I smiled up at the bouncer, at the square planes of a face too tired to be cruel and too amused to be kind. My ID is in my pocket, and I won't need the return slip because I don't intend to return that book to anyone but the people of this city. He grinned wider. So it's one of those nights, apparently. Behind me, someone tutted about the cold. The line kept moving. Inside, bass thumped like a giant heart. I adjusted the strap of my tote, felt the ridge of the little first aid pouch I carried out of habit, and made myself breathe in counts of 4. The plan was simple, because it had to be. Walk in, confirm the manuscript, get proof, get out. Call Nate, hand everything to the police, keep my job, keep my soul. The bouncer extended his hand for my ID. I gave it to him. He flicked his gaze from the card to my face and back again. He read aloud, "Mara," like a sailor's nightmare. "More like bitter herbs," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm here for a book." "A story, is it?" He leaned forward. I smelled spearmint gum. "I like happy endings." "I do too." He looked past me at the people behind, then pulled the rope across my chest. "This is a members' event." "I'm invited." I reached into my tote and produced an email printed on actual paper because I have the curse of believing in paper. The letterhead bore the name Rowan Hargrave, art philanthropist and collector. On Tuesday, I spent 6 hours answering questions for her foundation's school outreach coordinator and made sure to add one of my own. Rowan's response had come that evening. "Come by Friday, bring your courage." The bouncer read the page. He looked unimpressed in the way big men learn to look when their job requires gatekeeping. He tapped a finger against the letterhead, considered me again, then turned to the podium where a hostess in silver eyeliner checked a tablet. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "No." "Listen," I said softly, angling my body so only he would hear. "The book you're babysitting tonight is under an international alert. If you keep me out, the police will come through your door, and your best hope will be that your manager takes the blame. If you let me in, I will be a quiet shadow, and you'll be a man who used his judgment. Either way, by midnight, people will be asking questions." For a moment I saw something flicker behind his eyes, not fear, not even doubt, but a weary mental calculation. The way night staff count risks and count hours until their children wake up for school. Then he laughed again and slid the rope back into place like a metal lid sealing a jar. "That's a nice story, Mara, but teacups don't threaten kettles." He gestured down the street. "There's a library down that way. My library, and that's my book." I stepped forward. His hand touched my forearm, light as a suggestion at first, then firmer when I didn't stop. He meant it to be a polite barrier. He didn't mean to hurt me, but the moment his thumb pressed near the bone, something old and electric lit up under my ribs. 2 years ago, a volunteer was harassed on her way home from our teen writing club, and I enrolled our staff in a free self-defense class run by a women's boxing gym. We laughed through it, made fun of our own elbows, learned how to create space with our bodies and voices. I remembered the coach's voice. You don't have to be stronger, you just need an exit. I'm not going to ask a third time, I said, but I wasn't really asking anymore. I twisted my wrist the way the coach had shown me, turning the narrowest part of bone through the circle of his fingers, and stepped sideways. He held on half a beat longer with a grunt of surprise. Then momentum did what my strength never could. The rope jerked, his heel slid on a patch of damp, his center of gravity went hunting for the floor. I kept my balance the way librarians keep thousands of spines upright. Small corrections, breath, belief. He went down onto the carpeted threshold with a thud that silenced the nearby chatter. For a blink we stared at each other, me on my feet, him flat on his back, big eyes blinking up at the ceiling lights like planets he hadn't noticed were there. Stunned, not hurt, surprise washed across his face with the innocence of a boy who'd fallen off a bike and couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. I didn't mean, I began. He blinked twice more, then he started to laugh again, softer, incredulously, the sound all breath this time. I'll be damned, he said to the ceiling. The librarian got me. The crowd around us reacted the way crowds do when they realize they're standing inside a story. A few gasps, one cruel cheer, someone fishing out a phone because living once isn't enough anymore. Another security guard materialized from the vestibule, a woman with a neat bun and a tiny radio twined at her ear. Her eyes cut from me to the bouncer to the letter in my hand. The hostess leaned in to whisper, "Let her in. She's on Lady Rowan's printout now." The bouncer on the floor groaned, rolled to one side, and raised a hand like a man politely bidding at an auction. "It's all right," she said to her colleague. When he sat up, he was grinning with the irritable admiration of someone who has unexpectedly enjoyed themselves. "She's theater." I offered him my hand because my mother raised me to be embarrassing. He took it with a warm, steady grip and heaved himself to standing. "We square?" I asked under my breath. "For now, Miss Storytime," he said, rubbing his shoulder, "but don't mistake my sense of humor for forgiveness. Keep it civil in there." "I intend to." He swept the rope aside as if he were unveiling a painting. The hostess smiled with a kind of conspiratorial sympathy, the look women exchange like a match in dark hallways, and the second guard gave me a nod that might have meant respect or might have meant I'll be watching. Inside the foyer, heat wrapped around me alongside the smell of vetiver and money. The ceiling rose higher than I expected, painted with constellations that winked in the dim. A coat check girl with glitter on her collarbone handed me a token. Beyond a second door, the bass shivered the glasses on a tray. The Meridian did not pretend to be a nightclub, it pretended to be a heaven. In London, the difference can be as thin as paper. The main room was an oval, wrapped in velvet and gold, with a mezzanine that looked down like a Colosseum gallery. People leaned on railings, laughed, posed for photos. On a small stage at the far end, a cellist played over the synths, her bow tracing lines across the air. I scanned the room too quickly, heart hot in my throat. Where are you, little book? Who has you? Who doesn't deserve you? I made myself slow down. The trick in libraries, and in clubs I was learning, isn't to scan for objects, it's to notice patterns. The crowd flowed around 3 points, the bar, the stage, and a cluster of velvet screens to the right, where a silver rope kept everyone out. The screens glittered with a painted design of flowering vines and tiny golden birds. A private room. Guests disappearing behind it had the stillness of money that knows its corners won't be questioned. I turned toward the bar first, because I needed water and an anchor. The bartender had a halo of tight curls and the no-nonsense calm of someone who has seen every kind of story unfold across a countertop. Her name tag said NIA. She slid a glass toward me when I didn't even open my mouth. "Tap with ice," she said, and added a lemon without asking. "You look like you run cool, but not tonight." "Thank you," I said, grateful to be read like a familiar page. "Have you seen Lady Rowan?" Naya tilted her head toward the velvet screens. "In and out. She's running a little salon tonight." The way she said salon contained a universe of disdain and amusement. "Who are you when you're not thirsty?" "A librarian." I clocked the tote. Naya raised her eyebrow. "You're here for the poetry slam?" "In a manner of speaking," I swallowed, then let the truth come out smaller than my fear and exact as a catalog number. "An item went missing from my library. I have reason to believe it's in that room." Naya's shoulders softened by a millimeter. "You got receipts?" In my head, water.
Silas Crane? The name felt hard in my mouth. I knew it from the news. Crane's art storage company had lost a shipment of antiquities last spring in a warehouse accident no one could investigate because a certain counselor kept inspecting the investigation. In libraries, we call accidents like that a reader with the wrong card in the right room. "You didn't hear it from me," Nia said, "but if you get your book, don't leave through the front. Use the kitchen corridor past the restrooms and the service yard. Back gate code is 4 stars and a 0. It resets every Saturday." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. My voice was careful with gratitude. She wiped the bar with a slow rhythm, eyes never leaving my face. "I like people who fight for quiet things." Then Nia's mouth curved. "And I like watching men who think they know the ending learn to read again." "Then keep an eye on the ceiling," I said before I could help myself, and we both laughed for the first time that night. I finished the water, thanked her, and made for the screens. The guard who'd nodded at me earlier repositioned herself like a chess piece, shifting to block a file. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't need to. Power looks different on a woman who has decided not to be moved. "Private event," she said softly. "List only." "I have an invitation from Lady Rowan." I lifted the paper. "I believe you." She dipped her chin, the smallest of acknowledgments. "But my orders are to admit only those I recognize." "Recognize this, then," said a voice behind me, not cruel, just amused, and heavy with the kind of money that forgets its weight. I turned. Rowan Hargrave descended from the mezzanine like a moon on a velvet string. She wore winter white, a dress that moved when she moved like snow remembering a hill. Her hair was cropped close to her skull. Her lips were the red of someone who does not eat pasta in public. "Mara Whitlow," she said, smiling like she'd rehearsed it. "The woman who knows more about us than we know about ourselves. Let her through, please." The guard stepped aside. Rowan offered me her arm as if we were entering a field rather than a room. Up close, the lines around her eyes told me she was older than the magazines made her out. Her perfume smelled faintly of saffron and something darker, like books left closed too long. "You came," she said, and if there was relief under her lacquer, it flashed and disappeared before I could be sure. "You asked me to bring courage. I brought truth and a tote with a shoulder strap." She laughed. "We'll all need shoulders before the night's done." The room behind the screens was smaller than I'd expected, but the air felt larger. These were the kind of rooms where secrets attend school and graduate with honors. A long table ran down the center, covered in black velvet. On it, under a glass hood, lay the reason my legs had not stopped shaking since I left Holborn. A small, thick book, dark leather mottled with age, 4 tiny bosses on the cover worn smooth as river stones. My book. The breath left me so fast I tasted iron. I forced myself to look away from it and mapped the rest of the room instead. 10 people. Silas Crane perched at the head like a cat who knows the house belongs to his teeth. 2 men whose wrists wore watches with faces as large and blank as gods. A woman in a scarlet trouser suit whose smile could have cut lace. A couple I recognized from a gossip site, infamous for buying an entire village just to be its mayor and mayoress. A young man with eyes like a bird's and a perpetual flinch. And Rowan to my right, reflecting all of it in a calm so polished I could almost see myself vanish inside it. Silas rose when he saw us. His mouth did something I suppose he believed was a smile. "Lady Hargrave," and he paused on me long enough to imply a history he did not have. A guest from the world of facts. Mr. Crane, Rowan said, all air and diplomacy. This is Mara. She's a steward for the object you've agreed to show us. Steward, he repeated, rolling it like a sweet between his teeth. Marvelous word. We could stand more stewardship in these times when governments act like overzealous parents. He gestured toward the glass hood. You'll find the hours in perfect condition. If anything, happier here than in a city office where fluorescent lights flatten souls. I said, it was happy where readers loved it. I wasn't there to spar with him, but something iron in me refused to stay quiet. It learned a language in their hands. Silas's eyes flicked with a tiny interest. I do adore a romantic librarian. Please, have a look. Rowan told me your eye is monk-sharp. He stepped aside, and the room narrowed until the only thing that existed was the book. I came as close as the rope allowed, bent at the waist, and let my vision do what it has practiced its whole life. The leather had been cleaned too much in the 20th century. Someone loved it with products. The bosses were medieval, but one was replaced in the 1880s. I recognized the little groove at the corner where a Victorian craftsperson's hand had slipped. The clasp was original. My heart climbed into my mouth. I peered at the lower foredge. There. The nick. And there. Faint and miraculous as a vein under thin skin, the pale blue of a lapis lazuli line in an initial no larger than the nail on my little finger. The single place a scribe mixed too much binder and left a shine that caught certain light. I forgot to blink. Someone in the room laughed gently, and I remembered my own body. May I? I started, but stopped because asking permission of a thief grants him the ceremony he craves. There's a prayer on the first page, I said. Incipit o intemerata et in aeternum benedicta. Except the scribe wrote intermerata because the line break tricked him and because humans don't become perfect when they touch perfect things. Silas tapped a finger against the glass. I'm told we mustn't remove the cover until all pledges are in. It keeps tempers civil and wallets open. Rowan's mouth tightened. A showman's insistence. You say that like a curse, my lady, Silas murmured, and the room smiled with him. Tell me, librarian, what is the replacement cost for love? You know there isn't one. He spread his hands as if I'd proven his point. And yet the world insists we convert devotion into numbers every day. Think of this as another conversion, blurrier perhaps, but honest as fire. Honest as fire. I thought about the warehouse his company lost, the flames and insurance and the emptiness after. In my pocket, my phone vibrated, a short pulse for a text, a long one for a message from a favorite contact, Nate. I didn't reach for it. Not here. Not with the room watching my fingers as if they were making a promise. Rowan touched my elbow, so lightly it might have been a draft. Courage, librarian girl, she whispered. I brought you because you have the only eyes I trust. Then trust what they tell you, I whispered back. It's ours. Silas clapped his hands once, and the sound folded around us like a curtain. Shall we begin? He said. Tonight's antechamber will see 3 objects find their destinies. The first, this devotional, tenderly made and tenderly kept. Provenance to be shown post-pledge, as we have agreed. He smiled at me when he said provenance, the way a cat smiles at a birdcage. The opening bid is 200,000. A murmur broke across the table. The scarlet-suited woman's finger twitched. The couple from the gossip site blinked as if counting their vacations. The young man flinched and then stared, greed and fear wrestling in his mouth. I felt dizzy, as if someone had put a price on breath. Rowan's nail grazed the underside of my wrist, a question. I shook my head, not at her, but to the stupid part of me that wanted to beg her to buy our book with the purse she didn't carry, to steal it back from me using the thief's own tools. She was part of this room, whether or not she believed her philanthropy turned its knives into spoons.
Back down, he repeated, as if practicing the words before writing my obituary. Mara. If they close that hood and walk my book out the back, we lose the only thread the police can pull. If I lift the hood, if I photograph the opening page with our library stamp, you'll be arrested. Maybe, I said. Or I'll be a steward. The word put a steadying hand on my spine. I slid back to the ladder, tossed the rope down into the service yard, and felt my inside smolder like paper fed through a slow fire. Below, the kitchen noise swelled and hinged like a living thing. I swung my legs over the edge and climbed until my boots found the crate again. 5 minutes, Nate hissed. Then I pulled a plug and run. Make it 3, I said, and slipped into the corridor like a letter under a door. The guard at the screens was waiting in the velvet mouth of the entrance when I emerged. She did not look surprised. Genuine professionals rarely are. She raised her hand without touching me. Where have you been? Looking for a restroom, I said, because some lies are as old as plumbing. Her mouth tightened by the smallest degree. Mr. Crane has requested that all guests remain in the room for a moment, for security. Then I'll be right with you. I angled closer to the table, heart breaking against my ribs like a fist at a locked door. Silas spoke to someone in a low voice and then, like magic, smiled at me with too many teeth. Miss Whitlow, don't worry, we're quite safe here. He tapped the hood as if it were a pet's head. I plan to show you the first page myself after the pledges, so that you can confirm what we all desire so much: authenticity. The word cut me. Desire sounds like love until you give it a face. I took a step closer. Rowan moved too, coming to stand between me and the table, as if she could hold the whole world together with her posture. She said, "Mara, you brought the courage. Let it stand a moment longer." "If I stand," I whispered, "the book walks." The guard reached for me then, gentle but inexorable as the tide. Her fingertips barely touched my sleeve, and I thought of how many times I had told little hands in our children's room to be gentle with paper that had survived wars and winters and the boredom of being beautiful. I thought of my mother's hands turning library books upside down when I was small to see if the characters would fall out. Then I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do tonight. Something loud. I took a breath deep enough to hurt and shouted, clear and bright as a bell, "Fire!" It wasn't true, but the room believed me because the room had already been waiting for something to go wrong. People flinched, stepped back, a glass tipped, a chair scraped. The guard's hand left my sleeve and went to her radio. Silas turned toward the corridor with irritation, not fear, because he was a man who lived above alarm. Rowan's eyes filled with horror, not at the word, but at me. I lifted the hood. It was lighter than I expected and heavier than sin. Air rushed across the table. For a fraction of a second, I looked down at the book like a pilgrim, finally seeing the relic she crossed 3 countries for, and my heart made a sound I will never be able to write down. There was the rubricated initial. There was the misspelling. There the thumbprint in the margin that we always pretend not to see. I took out my phone, snapped 3 photographs so fast my thumb blurred, then slid my palm under the cover and lifted only as far as I needed to see the first page. Our stamp, the Holborn Community Library oval in faint, dignified purple, pressed into the lower right corner a century ago by a woman with a bun so tight it gave her headaches and authority. Proof. "Stop," Silas said calmly, and the word packed a threat inside it the way good writing packs everything. "Replace the hood, Miss Whitlow." "Call the police," I said, to no one and to Nia and to everyone. "This item is the property of the people of London." The guard reached me then, for real. Her hand closed over my wrist, and I let go of the cover because no page deserves a tear born of pride.
The bouncer loomed in the doorway, rubbing his shoulder and looking torn between admiration and the kind of duty that pays bills. I could feel more bodies approaching from the club proper, a swell of curious and dangerous. Rowan stepped close and, in a voice too quiet to carry, said, "Mara, if you go to jail, who will watch over the rest?" "I will," I said, and realized I meant not only myself, but everyone who had ever loved a quiet thing. Then everything tilted. Someone cut the lights. The music outside stopped like a throat being closed by fingers. In the confusion, the book shifted under my palm. The guard swore softly. A glass broke. For an instant, the skylight above us flashed with the ghost of a camera lens. "Nate, hold steady," I begged the ceiling. "Hold steady, River." A hand closed around my tote with a jerk strong enough to pull me off balance. I spun, using the nearest weapon I had, a rolled-up program brochure from the table, ridiculous and earnest and very much me, and smacked the hand away. It belonged to the young man with the birdish eyes, his hunger finally too big for his bones. He yelped. The bouncer moved to block him. Silas shouted for calm, which is the thing you shout when you enjoy chaos. I slid the hood back onto the book with all the care I could muster in the dark. It bumped the velvet, settled, and the room exhaled as if it had been holding one breath since 1493. I turned toward the corridor, toward the kitchen, toward the service yard where Nate's rope might still be dangling, like a sentence we hadn't yet finished. The guard tried to hold me, but lost me because chaos forgives small rebellions. I ran. The corridor swallowed me and then spit me into the bright steel of the kitchen where staff moved with the soundless choreography of people who deal with emergencies that are not their own. "Backdate," Nia said without turning her head. 4 stars and a 0. "I owe you a lifetime of returns," I said. She smiled into the sink like we'd told a very good joke. I pushed into the service yard, found the keypad, typed 4 stars and a 0, and heard the lock click like a blessing. Cold air slapped my face. I slipped into the alley and pulled the gate shut behind me. For a moment, the world shrunk to the damp smell of brick and the faraway sound of a cab's lonely, hopeful horn on Curtin Road. I texted Nate, "Out. You?"
"Back down," he repeated, as if practicing the words before writing my obituary. "Mara, if they close that hood and walk my book out the back, we lose the only thread the police can pull. If I lift the hood, if I photograph the opening page with our library stamp, you'll be arrested." "Maybe," I said, "or I'll be a steward." The word put a steadying hand on my spine. I slid back to the ladder, tossed the rope down into the service yard, and felt my inside smolder like paper fed through a slow fire. Below, the kitchen noise swelled and hinged like a living thing. I swung my legs over the edge and climbed until my boots found the crate again. 5 minutes, Nate hissed. Then I pulled a plug and run. "Make it 3, I said, and slipped into the corridor like a letter under a door. The guard at the screens was waiting in the velvet mouth of the entrance when I emerged. She did not look surprised. Genuine professionals rarely are. She raised her hand without touching me. "Where have you been?" "Looking for a restroom," I said, because some lies are as old as plumbing. Her mouth tightened by the smallest degree. "Mr. Crane has requested that all guests remain in the room for a moment, for security." "Then I'll be right with you." I angled closer to the table, heart breaking against my ribs like a fist at a locked door. Silas spoke to someone in a low voice and then, like magic, smiled at me with too many teeth. "Miss Whitlow, don't worry, we're quite safe here." He tapped the hood as if it were a pet's head. "I plan to show you the first page myself after the pledges."
so that you can confirm what we all desire so much: authenticity. The word cut me. Desire sounds like love until you give it a face. I took a step closer. Rowan moved too, coming to stand between me and the table, as if she could hold the whole world together with her posture. She said, "Mara, you brought the courage. Let it stand a moment longer." "If I stand," I whispered, "the book walks." The guard reached for me then, gentle but inexorable as the tide. Her fingertips barely touched my sleeve, and I thought of how many times I had told little hands in our children's room to be gentle with paper that had survived wars and winters and the boredom of being beautiful. I thought of my mother's hands turning library books upside down when I was small to see if the characters would fall out. Then I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do tonight. Something loud. I took a breath deep enough to hurt and shouted, clear and bright as a bell, "Fire!" It wasn't true, but the room believed me because the room had already been waiting for something to go wrong. People flinched, stepped back, a glass tipped, a chair scraped. The guard's hand left my sleeve and went to her radio. Silas turned toward the corridor with irritation, not fear, because he was a man who lived above alarm. Rowan's eyes filled with horror, not at the word, but at me. I lifted the hood. It was lighter than I expected and heavier than sin. Air rushed across the table. For a fraction of a second, I looked down at the book like a pilgrim, finally seeing the relic she crossed 3 countries for, and my heart made a sound I will never be able to write down. There was the rubricated initial, there was the misspelling, there the thumbprint in the margin that we always pretend not to see. I took out my phone, snapped 3 photographs so fast my thumb blurred, then slid my palm under the cover and lifted only as far as I needed to see the first page. Our stamp, the Holborn Community Library oval in faint, dignified purple, pressed into the lower right corner a century ago by a woman with a bun so tight it gave her headaches and authority. Proof. "Stop," Silas said calmly, and the word packed a threat inside it the way good writing packs everything. "Replace the hood, Miss Whitlow." "Call the police," I said, "to no one and to Nia and to everyone. This item is the property of the people of London." The guard reached me then, for real. Her hand closed over my wrist, and I let go of the cover because no page deserves a tear born of pride. The bouncer loomed in the doorway, rubbing his shoulder and looking torn between admiration and the kind of duty that pays bills. I could feel more bodies approaching from the club proper, a swell of curious and dangerous. Rowan stepped close and in a voice too quiet to carry said, "Mara, if you go to jail, who will watch over the rest?" "I will," I said, and realized I meant not only myself, but everyone who had ever loved a quiet thing. Then everything tilted. Someone cut the lights. The music outside stopped like a throat being closed by fingers. In the confusion, the book shifted under my palm. The guard swore softly. A glass broke. For an instant, the skylight above us flashed with the ghost of a camera lens. "Nate, hold steady," I begged the ceiling. "Hold steady, River." A hand closed around my tote with a jerk strong enough to pull me off balance. I spun, using the nearest weapon I had, a rolled-up program brochure from the table, ridiculous and earnest and very much me, and smacked the hand away. It belonged to the young man with the birdish eyes, his hunger finally too big for his bones. He yelped. The bouncer moved to block him. Silas shouted for calm, which is the thing you shout when you enjoy chaos. I slid the hood back onto the book with all the care I could muster in the dark. It bumped the velvet, settled, and the room exhaled as if it had been holding one breath since 1493. I turned toward the corridor, toward the kitchen, toward the service yard where Nate's rope might still be dangling, like a sentence we hadn't yet finished. The guard tried to hold me, but lost me because chaos forgives small rebellions. I ran. The corridor swallowed me and then spit me into the bright steel of the kitchen where staff moved with the soundless choreography of people who deal with emergencies that are not their own. Backdate, Nia said without turning her head. 4 stars and a 0. I owe you a lifetime of returns, I said. She smiled into the sink like we'd told a very good joke. I pushed into the service yard, found the keypad, typed 4 stars and a 0, and heard the lock click like a blessing. Cold air slapped my face. I slipped into the alley and pulled the gate shut behind me. For a moment, the world shrunk to the damp smell of brick and the faraway sound of a cab's lonely, hopeful horn on Curtin Road. I texted Nate. Out. You?
A second later. Out. Enough to print on Monday. Meet at the library. It's safer than your place. 20 minutes. I started walking. My legs felt like reeds in a river I had decided to cross because at some point you have to stop waiting for bridges. I tucked my phone into my pocket and adjusted the tote on my shoulder. It felt heavier now, not with the book. I hadn't taken it. I wouldn't without a warrant and a miracle. But with proof. With photographs that would break something open. With the smell of velvet and old leather still clinging to my sleeve like a benediction. On the main road, traffic glared inside. Friday night in London often feels like an exam everyone forgot to study for. I kept to the edges, away from the pockets of laughter and the puddles that hid oil in their colors. My heart began to slow. The air tasted like rain and relief. For the first time all night, I let myself imagine the book back under the thin winter sunbeam that slants through the special collections window at 10:30. I let myself picture the pensioner petting the edge of the page like a cat he's pretending not to love. I let myself breathe. My phone buzzed again. A message, but not the long buzz of Nate or the polite tap of my mother asking if I had eaten. Just a number I didn't recognize. I nearly ignored it. Then I saw the thumbnail and went cold all at once. It was a photograph of the Special Collections reading room. I knew that room the way I know my own face. The camera's angle was wrong, too high, as if taken from the little security speaker above the doorway. The picture showed the long table, the lamps with their green shades, the chairs pushed under with the exactness of closing time. On the table, a copy of the Evening Standard with today's date, folded to the front page. In the corner of the frame, a hand held the paper open. Below the image, 4 words. We're inside your quiet. My knees went liquid. I stopped walking because movement suddenly felt like a dare. The alley behind me breathed a small, damp breath. I lifted my eyes and looked down the block toward Holborn, as if the library could hear me from here through the entire city. My phone buzzed again before I could decide whether to call Nate or the police or Rowan or God. Another image. The same room. The same wrong angle. This time, the hand rested on the back of one of the chairs. A ring gleamed. I knew that ring from a photograph in a charity brochure, from a handshake in a foyer, from the way it had flashed under skylight glass when the word provenance was spoken with a cat's mouth. A third message arrived before I could breathe properly. No picture now, just text. Bring the photographs to the stacks. Come alone. Or we will remove something else you love, and you will have to teach the city to live with that silence. I didn't notice I'd backed against a wall until cold brick shivered through my coat into my spine. Somewhere on the main road, a woman laughed in a way that sounded like a knife being set down on a plate. Rain began, in the soft, indecisive way rain sometimes begins here, as if the sky is asking permission. My thumb hovered over Nate's name, then slid to dial the police. I didn't press call. I stared at the words. Or we will remove something else you love. The library had alarms and lights and a sergeant with a kind smile on the night patrol rota, but I knew in my blood that whoever had sent those photos had been inside before without tripping anything. They knew which doors slept lightly and which ones slept like the dead. They knew how to make a green shaded lamp look like a signal from the other side of the world. They knew, perhaps, which book's absence would hurt me most besides the one under glass back at the Meridian. I started walking again, faster now, then running, boots slapping through puddles that didn't bother with disguises. The city pulled its wet coat around my shoulders and whispered, "Choose." Lights smeared in the rain. I took a corner too fast. My tote banged against my hip like a warning bell. Neat's name lit my screen again. "Where are you?" And I swiped it away because the only answer I could give was, "Not where I should be." When the library's facade appeared, sober red brick, white stone, the words Holborn Community carved into a lintel that has seen wars and waltzes, I felt something inside me lift its head and listen. The building looked exactly as it always did at night. Calm, serious, kind. Only one light burned, the one by the staff entrance, a small rectangle like a promise. I slowed because fear requires ceremony. The staff door had a keypad. Only 10 people knew the code, and one of them was me, and another was the woman who watered the plants when we forgot, and another was the security sergeant who kept a photograph of his granddaughter in his wallet and showed it to me every second Thursday, as if she'd aged a week. I wiped my palms on my coat, typed the code, heard the click, stepped inside, and let the door close the world behind me. The smell met me first. Not the warm paper smell I love, but something metallic and faintly sweet, the smell rooms get when they've held their breath too long. The lights in the corridor were on a low sensor. They rose as I moved, like dawns. My own footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, like someone who has borrowed a body and isn't used to it yet. "Sergeant," I called softly, first name out of respect, not rank. "Gareth?" No answer. I told myself he was on his rounds, that he would appear around a corner in a minute and call me a night owl and ask whether I had eaten dinner. The staircase up to special collections stood at the end of the corridor like a throat. I took the steps 2 at a time and told my heart to stop using up all the oxygen. At the top, the small foyer outside special collections waited like a held note. The lamp under the portrait of Anna Russell, benefactor and terebinth cook, was lit. The glass case containing our display on women binders in the 19th century had a smear on it, as if someone with a nervous hand had polished it and then forgotten to finish. The door to the reading room stood slightly ajar. It should never stand like that at night. It should close itself properly like a person with manners. I pushed it open. The green lamps glowed. Their shades threw little islands of color onto a room I spend more waking hours in than my own flat. At the far table, the Evening Standard lay exactly as it had in the photograph. On the chair nearest it, a hand rested, like punctuation. "Don't move," I heard myself say, and realized how absurd it was because I was the one disobeying signs tonight. The hand lifted. The person attached to it stood up very slowly, turned, and smiled. The ring gleamed. The smile was the same one that had brushed my elbow with encouragement and my ethics with a feather. Rowan Hargrave looked at me as if we were at a luncheon and said, as if she were offering me a sandwich, "Good, you came alone." The room hummed behind us with the sound old air makes when it meets new ideas. On the far wall, the portrait of our first head librarian seemed to tilt a fraction, as if he were trying to decide whether to be proud of me or worried. Rowan slid her hand from the chair back and into her coat pocket. I did not see a weapon. I saw a woman who had dressed for power and found a different kind waiting. "Where is Gareth?" I asked. My voice scraped the room like a too dry brush. "If you hurt him—" "He's alive," she said, "and fond of crossword puzzles he pretends are security rota notes. He will have a hell of a story for his granddaughter that he won't tell. He's in the staff lounge downstairs with a cup of tea, and he believes he is doing his job because for years that has been enough. I have made sure he will not be disturbed." "You drugged him." I hated how my mouth made the word like a prayer. "I gave him a night off," she replied. Her face changed, flickered, settled. "Bring me the photographs."
And if I don't?
Then Silas will sell your hours in the morning, and by afternoon it will be on a plane, and at midnight a private jet will take it to a room no child will ever be allowed to breathe in, and that will be the kindest thing that happens to you this weekend. You sent the messages. It wasn't a question. She stepped closer. She smelled like saffron and old promises again. I sent the truth, she said, that we are inside your quiet, that we know where you hide your faith. I cannot control Silas, but I can control how the story of this night ends for you. I tightened my grip on the tote until the straps pressed lines into my palm. Somewhere below us, a boiler turned over like an old dog in its sleep. I invited you to the Meridian, I said. I told you to bring courage. Why? Because there is more than one kind of theft. There is the theft you stop with alarms, and there is the theft you stop with a story. I need yours to end differently so mine can end the way it must. You're not a currency you can exchange for absolution. No, you're a librarian. She smiled in a way that made a small cliff inside me crumble. Bring me the photographs, Mara. Choose me over Silas. Choose the version of tonight where the hours come home. Through me. She reached into her coat then, not for a weapon, but for a key. She laid it on the table between us. It was old and brass and worn in a way that meant it had been useful and not ornamental. I recognized it immediately. Stack's key. The master for the cage inside the cage. The place in the basement where we keep the things we would carry out in a fire. How do you have that? I whispered. Her mouth made a small, bitter curve. Because I have funded this library for 7 years, in ways that you have not had the time or appetite to trace. Because your board chair likes long lunches and short protocols. Because power passes keys back and forth like sweets. She tapped the key once with her ring. Bring me the photographs, and I will bring you a miracle. I will bring the book back by morning. You'll traffic it through your own network, I said. You'll launder a miracle. I will place it in your hands in the reading room, and I will watch your pensioner pet the edge of the page like a cat he is pretending not to love. Sometimes laundering is what the guilty call healing when they learn to put something back where it belongs. The room seemed to tilt. My body remembered the way the bouncer's eyes had looked up at the ceiling and laughed at the surprise of it. I thought of Nia sliding the towel into my hand as if she were passing me a loaf of bread. Of Nate on the roof asking for a window and getting a sky. I thought of Gareth downstairs with his tea and his crosswords and his granddaughter's name in a loop in his throat. I thought of the hours paging themselves open in my mind to the prayer the scribe had misspelled, and then the next one and the next. Rowan lowered her voice. Mara, I need you to choose fast. If Silas senses I am playing 2 games at once, he will eat the board. You're asking me to trust you over the police. I'm asking you to trust the part of me that came to your story hour 3 years ago and stood at the back crying because a child asked whether the dragon ever gets tired of his own smoke. She closed her eyes for a second and opened them again. There is a girl, 14, who packs the returned books on Tuesdays when her mother is late from the cleaning job. She is reading to live. You gave her a book last winter with a girl in it who survives by being useful. She will become a conservator because of that book. Choose the ending where she has something to tend. I stared at the key. It looked heavier than my tote and lighter than a lie. My phone hummed in my pocket again, insistent, the way truth is insistent when you've been pretending not to hear it. My hand moved toward the tote without my permission, then away again. Choose, the city whispered through the radiators. Choose, the portrait said with its eyes. Choose, repeated the tiny, careful hum of the lamps. I opened my mouth to answer her and heard a small sound behind me like leather skidding against wood. I turned. The door to the Stacks hallway, locked always at night because big buildings like big rules, stood open by an inch. Beyond it, the dark had edges. Gareth? I called, hope an idiot in my voice. The door swung wider in a slow, graceful arc. Then a hand, broad, familiar with a scuffed knuckle where a fall had left a memory, appeared on the frame. The bouncer stepped into the foyer, out of place and perfectly placed, as if the city had decided to keep telling the same story until we learned to read it. He kept his voice low. "Miss Storytime," he said, and the words carried apology and warning and something like respect. "Your man on the roof didn't make it clean." He lifted his phone and showed me a grainy image, the alley, the rope, a figure running. Then another face I knew too well leaning into the shot, smiling like a threat. Silas Crane looked up from the screen and into the room, as if he could see us through the glass of 1,000 nights. "He knows where you are," he said, "and he's on his way." Rowan's mouth made a little line that meant a chapter was ending sooner than she had planned. My hand went for the key on the table because some instincts do not belong to ethics. Her hand landed on mine, warm, human, certain. "Choose," she said so softly it almost wasn't a word.
"Choose," she said, so softly it almost wasn't a word. My mouth was dry enough to rust. The old building seemed to angle itself toward us. The portraits, the lamps, the hush, like London had leaned in through the lintel to eavesdrop on the moment a librarian decided what kind of story she was living. I didn't speak right away. Decisions, in my experience, try to sell themselves as singular acts. But most are stacks, thin choices laid one on top of the other until they look like fate. Rowan's ring clicked once against the brass key as if it were trying to keep time with my breath. Behind me, the Stack's door hushed on its hinges, and the big man from Meridian, my bouncer, stood there, a new punctuation in a sentence that was getting crowded. "Name?" I asked him, because names stop people from being scenery. He seemed surprised to be asked for himself in a room full of things. "Eamon," he said after a beat, like he hadn't said it in a while where it mattered. Then, with a rueful tilt of the mouth, "Eamon Miles." "Thank you for coming, Eamon," I said. He gave me a look that said, "Don't make a habit of it," and "Not a problem," all at once. Then he flicked his eyes toward the corridor. "Crane's in a car, 3 minutes out. He'll have at least one other. Your upstairs alarm logs will show nothing because a man with the right cigarette knows how to breathe on a sensor. If you're going to move, Miss Storytime, move." Rowan didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on me with the studied stillness of a woman who has learned to win thy patience. "Bring me the photographs, and I will bring your hours home." I slid my phone out and with my thumb opened the photo roll to the 3 images, the open devotional, the stamp, the fat, perfect misspelling that made me want to kiss a long-dead scribe on his distracted forehead. "I'm not a fence, I'm a steward." "Then steward the outcome," Rowan said. "The police will take months. Silas will take minutes. Choose a clock you can live with." Eamon's radio hissed once like an annoyed cat. He kept his voice low. "Black Saloon just turned onto High Holborn. If he parks on Red Line, he'll be on your doorstep in under 2. My thumbs were already moving. I opened the message thread with Nate and typed 4 words we'd agreed on months ago when we'd been arguing about whether an oral history counted as a primary source. Dead Man's Switch Live. A little status bar slid along with itself as the videos and images uploaded to the shared drive he kept in 3 countries, and on an old Mac Mini in his wardrobe. My next text: "If I don't ping you in 15 minutes with the word cathedral, publish. All of it. Names, numbers, the lot." 3 dots. Then, "Confirmed. I hate this." I did too. But fear and I had learned to work at the same desk. I looked at Rowan. "No photos leave this room. No files are transferred to your devices. You get to look. You do not get to keep. I keep leverage. If the hours are back under our glass by morning, I give the police a statement about your cooperation that reads like a hymn. If they're not, Nate publishes and you can explain to the Crown why your foundation's expense account includes a line item for a crate with a false bottom."
Rowan's mouth made a small shape that would have been a smile if it had been allowed to grow up. "Your terms are unlovely," she said, "but effective." I said, "That's how you describe a book truck after you've run it into your ankle. Do we have a deal?" Eamon's gaze slid across Rowan's face, interested despite himself. Rowan nodded once, a clean movement that could have been assent or ritual. "Show me," she said. I angled the screen between us. She took the images in with the same grave attention she gave to human faces, which told me more than I wanted to know about the order of her loves. When the stamp appeared, our shy little purple oval, her throat worked around something like hunger and something like shame. "Good," she murmured. "Good." She tapped the brass key on the table again. "Then come with me." Eamon shifted. He said, "I'll take the hall. If Crane gets past me, he'll be missing a tooth he likes." "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he muttered, and slipped into the corridor with the confident softness of a large man who has learned to be gentle with doorframes. Rowan closed her fingers over the old key and moved toward the Stack's door. The lock looked like a small, patient animal. She fed the key into its mouth and turned. The bolt slid back with a heavy, satisfying sound. Cold air exhaled from the stairwell beyond. The Stack smelled like linen and dust, and the industrious ghosts of women who once mended spines for a living. We went down together, me in front, because I knew which step squeaked, Rowan behind because she knew how to make heels inaudible. The stairwell bent twice and ended at a metal gate, the cage within the cage. Rowan fit the key again and turned with a care that told me she respected mechanisms when they served her. Inside, rows of rolling stacks waited in their tracks like obedient trains. Even in crisis, my heart did its ridiculous little dance. I love them. Each range wore a tidy label: incunabula, pamphlets, civic, 1700 to 1899, maps, folio, local ephemera. The air was cooler here. The dehumidifiers hummed like patient bees. "What are we doing?" I asked. Rowan said move past me with a confidence that recognized certain aisles in the dark and stopped before the folio map range. She said, "Your board chair lets me see the pretty things when no one is around." And if she meant to nettle me with that, she succeeded. He believes rich eyes are safer than poor hands. He's wrong, but his wrongness has been useful. She spun the wheel on the rolling stack and opened a corridor between shelves. Leather and buckram and old cloth bindings rose like buildings on either side. She reached to a shelf halfway up and pulled a flat clamshell box toward her with more tenderness than she'd shown a person that night. "Open it," she said. I did because I was incapable of not. Inside lay a 17th century atlas of London, Ogleby and Morgan's. Its engraved streets precise and arrogant. We used it every November to show school children how the city had burned and been reborn. I traced the river with my gaze the way I always do, counting bends like I was checking a sleeping child's breaths. You can return a book to a shelf. You cannot return what a fire takes, Rowan said quietly. I looked up sharply. "Rowan." Before I could finish her name, a cough sounded at the top of the stairwell, followed by 2 sets of footsteps that tried and failed to be polite. Eamon's voice rode down the stairwell like a low drum. "Miss Storytime? Company." Silas Crane stepped into the stacks with the astonishment of a man finding a fox in his drawing room. He wore a coat the color of money that's been ironed until it behaves. Another man came behind him carrying nothing visible but his body like a blunt instrument. Silas smiled at me with teeth the color of policies. He said, "Libraries. So much virtue and so much cardboard." His eye slid to Rowan. "And Lady Hargrave, the moon caught in the rafters. You do get around." Rowan did not bother to smile. "Turn around, Silas," she said. "Go home. You've overreached." Silas tutted. "You've been telling me that for 3 years, and yet somehow my arms keep finding new length." He tilted his head at me. "Mr. Whitlow, you've caused such a lovely mess." Eamon came down the last steps behind them and set himself between the men and the gate like a polite catastrophe. He didn't touch them, he just existed in their path with quiet professional malice. "What do you want?" I asked Silas, though I knew. He held up a phone. My own face looked back at me from the lock screen, a shot stolen from a newspaper interview last year where I looked as if I had just been told a secret and hadn't decided what it meant yet. You'll have sent the photographs to somewhere with claws, but you also keep them on you because you like to check that certainty exists. Give me the device, Miss Whitlow. No. His eyes warmed, which somehow made him colder. Then let me give you an alternate exercise. I have a man at your front desk with a can of accelerant and a cigarette he has promised not to light if I tell him not to. He is standing by your exhibition case with the Dickens letter the children like to point at because the handwriting looks like lightning. He has a timer on his phone. Every 30 seconds I don't receive a file, he will take one step closer to behaving like a bad idea. You're bluffing, I said. Because if I didn't say it out loud, my terror would write it on my bones. Silas gestured at the ceiling. A second later, my phone buzzed. An image appeared from an unknown number. Our foyer, shot from the corner, the exhibition case, the letter, a man's knee and the hem of a coat, a lighter, closed, politely asleep, in his hand. Rowan's voice went soft and venomous. "You are filth!" "Morality is a costume," Silas said. "Tonight I'm in velvet." His eyes came back to me. "The device, Miss Whitlow."
Eamon grinned at me, then at the detective. "You heard the lady." They moved. The foyer emptied enough that the room felt like it had taken a breath and was thinking about what to do with it. Rowan and I stood with Gareth by the table. The boy with the bird's eyes sat on a chair near the door, watched by an officer who had the weary kindness of men who have raised teenagers. I looked down at the book again and felt something unclench that had been tight since the velvet room. "Tomorrow," I said, because saying the word makes it more likely to arrive, "we'll open the doors and let 12 schoolchildren in, and the pensioner will pretend not the pet, and I pretend not to see. We'll make cocoa and paper cups like we always do when someone looks like they need it. We'll—" A new sound cut through the building, a high, wrong squeal, then a thud from somewhere deep in the rear corridors where the dumbwaiter shaft runs like a secret throat from the basement to the staff room. Gareth frowned. "That's not right." We turned as one. The officer with the boy said, "Stay," and the boy nodded like a puppy. The detective gestured for us to hang back, but curiosity drags librarians the way gravity drags pears. We moved toward the corridor in a small knot, footsteps quick, hearts quicker. The squeal sounded again, metal complaining about being asked to do something it had already done twice too many times. We reached the service hall. The dumbwaiter door at the mid-landing was ajar, a crack of black in a field of municipal beige. A smell pushed out, oil, old bread, something faintly sweet and wrong. "Don't touch that," the detective said. Too late. I had already put my fingers on the edge. I slid the door up. Inside the shaft, the little lift sat at waist height, its wooden tray glossy with age. On the tray lay a small, dark clamshell box the size of a human breath. Rowan inhaled like she'd been struck. "Oh, God." "What is it?" Gareth asked, though I could feel the answer arriving in my mouth like a name. "The beginner's book," Rowan whispered. "The one I promised her we would keep here until she could read it without her hands trembling. The one with the stitched spine and the ink that looks like rain." A note lay under it, typewritten, neat. "If you want this back, come alone to the roof. You have 6 minutes. Bring your keys." I felt the city tilt under my shoes. "Not again," I said to no one. "Not again." The detective started to say all the right words, procedure, perimeter, units, and the sensible part of me wanted his words to be the story. But the note's last line was a knife. "Bring your keys." Rowan's hand closed around a brass stack key so hard her knuckles went white. "I don't," I said to her. She looked at me with a face that finally had nothing polished left on it. "It's my debt. He's collecting it." Gareth reached for the radio.
All units." I didn't hear the rest. The dumbwaiter tray shuddered. The little clamshell box skated half an inch toward the shaft drop and stopped, like someone above had tugged a string and was waiting to see who would dance. I grabbed the box. It was cold and heavier than it looked. I turned and pressed it into Garrett's hands. "Lock this in the map case. Do not open it. Not for anyone. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, don't you dare," Garrett said, and his eyes were shining. "I won't," I lied, and looked at Gareth. "He asked for your keys. He'll settle for mine." I lifted my tote strap higher on my shoulder. "Eamon's out. The detective is right to be cautious. Nate is a journalist, not a wall. This one is on us." "Mara," Rowan said, and there it was, fear without strategy. "Please. I'm not going to the roof alone. I'm going with you." The detective tried to block us. I squared my shoulders and deployed the most powerful weapon a librarian owns, outrage shaped like politeness. "Officer, 2 minutes ago I incapacitated 3 grown men and activated a clean agent system without crying. I am very tired and very reasonable. But if you make me stand here while a child's first book is used as bait, I will go through you, and the headline will be spectacularly unflattering to your department. 2 minutes. On the roof, 10 behind us. That's the compromise." He stared at me. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. 10, he said, "and if you're not back, I will personally write you up as the most infuriating civilian I have met this year." "Get in line," I said, and ran. The stairwell up was mean and Victorian and stank of old paint. Rowan kept pace with me despite her shoes, the brass key clenched in her fist like a relic. At the top, the roof door was propped with a little rubber wedge, cheeky and cruel. Rain skittered in sideways. London's lights made the wet tar glitter like a faded galaxy. Wind chased our breaths across the open space. A figure stood near the far parapet, coat flapping, hair a smear. He held a small square object up between thumb and forefinger, like a trick coin. Even at a distance I knew the posture. The young man with the bird's eyes. Behind him a second shape perched on the parapet itself, balanced easily like a cat, a woman in a red surrel suit, who smiled as if gravity owed her a favor. "Good evening," Scarlett called, voice bright as cut glass. "Lovely room you have down there. We thought we'd try the balcony seating." "Put the book down," I said. The boy shook his head, eyes overwide. "You don't get to keep all of it." And he broke on the word keep. "You keep everything. You hoard history and make us ask permission to breathe it. We were going to share." "With whom?" I asked. "With your friends on a Telegram channel?" Scarlett laughed like a bell rung behind a painting. "Don't be parochial," she said. "Art is a river. You people keep building dams." "Some things are wells. We drink from them together or not at all." Rowan stepped forward. "Give me the keys and the box," she said to the boy. "Take the stamp. Tell yourself a story about redemption later. Run." He looked at me, at the edge, at the scarlet woman behind him. Rain licked our faces. Sirens echoed somewhere like distant arguments. Scarlett's smile sharpened. 6 minutes, she said. Less now. She held up a small device with a red button. It beeped twice primly. Pressure plate in the dumbwaiter shaft. Very old, very tired, and very willing to cry for attention. You 2 step back from that door and let us walk, or I press this and your pretty little beginner's book goes for a ride it won't survive. You've already sent it up. We sent the box, she said. We are literal. We are mean. We know exactly what parts hurt a woman who teaches small people to love paper. She flicked her eyes to Rowan. Keys. Rowan lifted the brass key with a steadiness I didn't feel. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw 7 years of lunches she had endured, donations she had made, hands she had washed off that she wanted to wash off, rooms she had smiled in while she searched for a lever. She took a breath that belonged in a chapel. No, she said to Scarlett. Not again. and she threw the key as far as she could into the dark. It arced like a small star and vanished over the wet edge of the roof, with a sound like a coin choosing its own side. Scarlet's smile dropped out of her face. The boy made a choking noise. Hope, fear, grief, I couldn't tell. Rain thickened, plastering my hair to my temple. Somewhere below us a door banged and men shouted. Scarlet lifted the red-button device like a toast. "Then we ruined the night for everyone," she said, and her thumb moved and met it like a kiss. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't ask Rowan. I sprinted for the boy, for the square of paper in his hand, for the place where decisions become consequences. Behind him, Scarlet's thumb reached the button and met it like a kiss. A siren in the shaft below us screamed, sudden and hungry. Air moved in the wrong direction, a rushing and updraft. The dumbwaiter clanged. The boy's shoe slipped on the wet tar. He windmilled, paper in his fingers. I grabbed for him and caught his wrist. For one breathless half-second we were a human chain. Me, him, the book. Behind him, Scarlet crouched like a cat about to jump. And then the roof under us shifted. Just a fraction. And the square of paper tilted out of the boy's hand toward the gutter. I lunged. Rowan shouted my name, and the city opened its mouth.
Eamon's jaw worked like he was counting to a number he hoped would add up to patience. Rowan's hand hovered near the atlas in its box, as if she were ready to slam it shut to protect London from another fire. I looked at the atlas and thought of third formers tracing alleys with sticky fingers and saying, "I live there," when the map had no such modern place on it. I looked at my phone and thought of my pensioner with the cat-petting hand. I looked at Silas and thought of how power gets bored and cures itself by inventing new rules for people who never agreed to play. Time, I thought again, and my mind went to the little control panel on the wall near the end of the aisle, the one we all pretend not to notice because buttons make people braver than they should be. Clean Agent Release, Einergen. 2 keyed switches, a glass flap, a sign that said, "Do not operate except in fire emergency." "What happens if we turn it on?" I asked Rowan without looking away from Silas. "You'll be very unpopular with everyone who breathes at a party," she said coolly. "But your books will be dry. Oxygen drops, the gas replaces the air politely, the flames go out. People remain conscious unless they deserve not to." Silas lifted a hand. "Let's not—" I moved. Not toward him, toward the panel. He barked a laugh. "You won't." "One step," I said. "One step from your man upstairs and I flood this room with enough gas to make your brain forget about your shoes. He can light his cigarette and a gale and the Dickens will live to be pointed at." "Miss Whitlow," said Silas, and now there was admiration in the thread. "You are not who I expected you to be." "Likewise," I said. "I thought you'd be taller." Rowan's eyes met mine over the atlas. There was a flicker there, agreement maybe, or the horrible intimacy of 2 people realizing they are in the same story for different reasons. She nodded once. "Eamon," she said, "if Miss Whitlow turns that key, you hold your breath and think about your daughter." He didn't ask how she knew he had one, he just nodded back. "Show me your man," I said to Silas. He arched an eyebrow as if I'd asked him to pass the salt. Then he gestured lazily to the phone again. Another picture arrived. The foyer, the exhibition case, the man now with the lighter open. The flame was not yet born, the thumb hovered, but the shadow now touching the wheel of fire. 15 seconds, Silas murmured. I put my hand on the key cover and the whole room tightened like a belt. I was buying time, yes, but also making a decision in slices. If I couldn't stop him from burning, I could at least choose where the fire went. Here, into an air we could change, or upstairs into a glass case whose alarm would ring like a hymn too late. Something moved to my left, too fast, too hungry. The young man from the Meridian, the one with the bird's eyes, stepped from behind the next range where I hadn't seen him slip in. His cheeks were pink with righteousness and fear. He had a backpack on his shoulders, skinny straps biting into a coat that tried to look expensive and failed. His gaze was fixed on the Ogilvy like a pilgrim's on a reliquary. "No," I said, too late. He lunged. Rowan snapped the atlas case shut just as his fingers reached for the paper. The sound was indecent, like a hand clapped over a mouth. Eamon was on him in 2 steps, gentler than he looked and faster than I thought possible.
The young man thrashed and in his flailing hit the map range's release wheel with his elbow. The moving stacks began to creep together with the terrible, slow inevitability of a machine doing exactly what it had been told. "Stop!" I shouted. "Stop!" I grabbed the safety bar to halt the motion, but in the same instant, Silas's man, blunt instrument, stepped in and put his shoulder to the wheel on the opposite end. The range groaned and kept closing. If the aisle shut, Rowan and the boy would be trapped between tons of paper and steel. People imagine book deaths are gentle. They aren't. Eamon swore, shoved the boy behind him, and braced his hands against one moving shelf, his back against the other, muscles screaming under a wool suit whose tailor never imagined this. Rowan flattened herself against the ends of boxes and bindings, with her palms trying to spread her narrow body over too much future mourning. Silas just watched, eyes bright, as if the story had finally become literary enough to amuse him. I didn't think. I ran to the opposite wheel, slammed the palm of my hand down on the red emergency bar, and locked my arm across it. The metal shuddered, and the range stuttered to a stop with a whine and a sigh. Eamon exhaled a sound that might have been gratitude or a hernia. Rowan closed her eyes for a half-second and then opened them with fury. "You bring wreckers into my stacks?" I said to Silas, and my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. "You threaten my readers, you threaten my books. You want the device? Come and take it from me." He smiled wider, enjoying the corner I'd painted myself into. "At last," he said, "we are speaking frankly." He nodded to his man. "Collect it." The blunt instrument came toward me in a line that would have been simple in a corridor without a Mara and a life. I stepped into him the way the boxing coach had taught us to step into fear, close enough to remove leverage. My elbow found his ribs, an old thought waking up, and he folded by a degree. Eamon shouted something cheerful and profane. I brought my forearm up under his wrist as he reached for my hand and twisted, not strength, just hinge, and his phone clattered to the floor, screen up. Flames still not born in the foyer image, but the thumb shadow now touching the wheel of fire. The sound his phone made hitting concrete jolted Silas out of his spectator posture. "Enough," he hissed, and moved. He had speed, he had practiced throwing his body into places he wanted to own. He reached for me, found my shoulder, and tried to pivot me away from the panel, the way you pivot a chessboard when you know you've lost. I let my knees go as if in prayer, and slid out under his hand like paper out of a folder. I flipped the glass cover up. I turned the first key. A red light came on with the patient certainty of a train's. 10 seconds to discharge, the label read. Small white numbers began to count down. "Don't," Silas said, and for the first time there was something like fear in his voice, not for the books, for himself. "Tell him to drop the lighter and step away." He hesitated, calculating which loss he would embarrass him less. Then he spat a curse and jerked his chin at his man's phone. The image moved, a hand lowering, a lighter closing, a step back. My own numbers kept marching down. 8, 7, 6. "Turn the second key," Rowan said softly. "Make sure. Then we breathe and we don't die." "Eamon," I said, eyes on Silas. "Out. Up. Get Gareth." "I'm not leaving you," he said. "You are," I answered, "because you're going to be useful again in 30 seconds and I will not be if I'm arguing." He gave me a look that said, "If you get yourself killed, I will haunt your book clubs," then moved, hauling the protesting bird-eyed boy by the scruff like an idiot cat. Silas's man made a move to block him. Eamon didn't touch him, just looked at him the way Cliff look at waves, and the man decided he had always meant to get out of the way. The second key was cold in my fingers. I turned it. The clean agent release siren sang its high, polite warning. Doors on the floor above would have fallen shut, dampers would have sealed. The panel light turned from red to green as if the room had changed its mind about what color meant. Then the gas came, soundless, invisible, and the air thinned. It didn't choke. It just made lungs feel like they were reading a new alphabet. Silas cursed and backed into the next range, as if he could hide behind geography. Rowan bent low over the atlas box, with her mouth open, drawing breath the way you draw water up a straw. I put my hand on the shelf to steady myself and focused on counting. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It worked. It always works. The terror shrank enough to be useful. In the new quiet, a sound rose from the far end of the corridor, footsteps, astonished and angry, and Gareth's voice, warm and confused and threaded through with professional insult.
What in the name of St. Pancras is going on in my basement? Relief made me lightheaded. Gareth, I called. Rowan gave you the night off. He did not, he said indignantly, and then stopped as he took in the scene, Silas by the shelves, me at the panel, Rowan bent over a map like a supplicant, Eamon at the gate with a boy who looked like guilt had a neck. Gareth set his tea carefully on the concrete because some habits survive coups. Then he took out his radio and said, with great dignity, "Control, this is Sergeant Evans in Special Collections. We have intruders and a live incident. Lock the front entrance. Call police. Oh, and ring Dr. Jennings. Tell her that her librarian is doing something clever and illegal again."
Clever and illegal. I would argue about that phrasing later. For now, Silas made one last calculation and lunged toward me, going for the only thing that still felt like a lever. My phone. I let him take it. His surprise lasted exactly as long as it took for him to realize the screen was already on the switchboard that would publish to Nate's World if my 15 minutes ran out. He tried to swipe, but my passcode wasn't a birthday or a cat. It was a cataloging joke no thief would think was funny. "Try," I said, and then, because I am a worse person than I want to be, "Dewey." He glared. The gas kept the room at a strange remove, like we were all a little underwater. Sirens, real ones now, began to peal above us, distant, coming closer. Rowan straightened with the atlas secured and set the box back gently into its clamshell. She turned to Silas with a kind of quiet pity I had not expected to see on her face. "It's gone," she said simply. "Nothing is done," he snarled, but his eyes had begun to flick around the room looking for exits the way trapped things do. "Actually," Gareth said cheerfully, picking up his tea again because he is a Philistine of the most useful kind, "a great deal is done. Police are on their way, front is locked, and I've just remembered where I put the handcuffs the council won't let me call handcuffs." He looked pointedly at Silas's blunt friend. "Sir, would you like to lay down on the floor on your belly like a gentleman?" Rowan's phone chimed. She glanced at it, then met my eyes. "Nate," she said softly. "He's outside. He wants to know if he should call the editor or the home office first." I almost laughed. "Tell him to call his mother and say he's eating vegetables." She didn't smile. He also sent a photograph from the roof of the Meridian loading bay. "The book is moving. Crane's people are taking it to a car now that they have realized you and I are not where they assumed." My stomach turned to wire. How? Because a story is a rope. Pull here and something drops there. She looked at me as if I were the only person in the room. "Give me the leverage. I'll make the call. It will not be pretty. It will be effective. The photographs are already gone if I die. But I'm not dying." The sirens grew fuller, heavier, like rain that has made up its mind. "Make your call." She did. In a voice that sounded like polished wood and old money, Rowan phoned someone I did not know and told them exactly where to put their car and who to remove from it. She used names I'd only read in footnotes about committees. She said national interest and provenance audit and recover it intact, or I will put your grandmother's house deeds through a shredder with my own hands. Then she hung up and for the first time all night looked a little like a person who had not slept well in a decade. "Who was that?" I asked. "The person who thinks he owns the person who thinks he owns Silas. I have been feeding him dirt for years because sometimes you cultivate a garden under a building you might, one day, want to collapse." Eamon whistled under his breath, impressed, despite everything. "Remind me never to owe you money, my lady." Rowan blinked at "my lady" as if it hurt, and then shook her head. "Don't call me that." The police arrived with the choreography of bureaucracy. Boots, voices, a carefully threaded caution. Gareth met them at the gate and made introductions that sounded like recipes. 2 intruders, 1 philanthropist, 1 librarian, 1 civilian asset who would prefer to be anywhere else. They took Silas's man first because blunt instruments are easy. Then they asked Silas to place his hands behind his back. He did, with the offended dignity of a swan being told it cannot smoke indoors. As they let him pass me, he turned his head and said, almost conversationally, "We are not done, Miss Whitlow." "No," I said, and let the tired truth of it be a promise. "We're just getting to the good part."
He smiled with half his mouth and was gone up the stairs, into the sirens and the fluorescent lights. The gas bled out of the air with a sigh. The stacks felt steadier as oxygen remembered itself. Eamon leaned his shoulder against a range and closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and looked at me. "You're all right?" "I will be when the hours are under our glass. Until then, we're only pretending." Rowan took out a small square object wrapped in dark cloth from her coat pocket and set it on the table beside the map box. "What is it?" She unwrapped it with careful fingers. A tiny metal stamp lay in her palm, the twin of our library's purple oval, except this one bright and unmarked, a century younger. Around its edge the words, "Hargrave Foundation, Benedictus." I had a copy made when I first started giving money to places like this, so that when we put things back they could bear more than one belonging, a public claim and a private penance. I have never used it. She closed her fingers and reopened them as if that might change the past. "I intend to use it." My throat did a small, terrible thing. "Why?" "Because I thought the world only gave me two choices, be a thief with taste or be a patron with blinders. You made a third." Footsteps again, lighter this time. Nate appeared at the top of the stairwell under police escort, hair a disaster, grin weaponized. "You chaotic saint." And then, because he knows me, "You didn't take the book." I took the pictures, and a decision I might have to defend to my board until my hair goes white. "Worth it," he said. Then he sobered. "Hargrave's call worked. The car was stopped. They've got the crate. They're bringing it here under police chain. Someone is going to want you to smile for a very boring photograph." Gareth made a reverent sound that I will be replaying in my mind the day I die. "We'll polish the glass," he said. "Mrs. Russell will forgive us for the hour." We came up out of the stacks together. Rowan, Eamon, Gareth, Nate, me, and the boy with the bird's eyes between two officers, looking smaller than his hunger. In the foyer, the green shades glowed as if the lamps had been waiting for us to finish being foolish. The Dickens letter sat under its case, unburned, handwriting still lightning. When the crate arrived, plain wood, stamped with the storage company's logo that would shortly be in court, someone asked me to sign forms. I read every line, because love reads. Then I signed. Gareth fetched the white gloves we keep for photographs that make donors behave. I didn't put them on. I needed to feel the weight of the hood in my bare hands. We took the book out together. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when the present believes in its own future. I lifted the hood as if I were lifting the edge of a night sky. The hours lay there, small and stubborn and impossibly alive, the blue lapis detail catching our green lamplight with the secret wink I had loved since the day I first catalogued it. Nate took his pictures. A detective with careful eyes wrote things down that were both banal and important. Rowan stood slightly apart, ring still, mouth still, letting herself watch without touching. Eamon hovered at the door, unfamiliar in a place where the most dangerous thing, most days, is boredom. I slid my fingers to the corner of the first page. I did not turn it. I just touched. "Home," I said. Softly, stupidly, like a child announcing what everyone can already see. Rowan cleared her throat. "Mara," she said, and I looked up. She nodded toward the atrium doors. "We have one more ending to write before the morning makes new beginnings. Silas has friends with telephones. There will be calls about jurisdiction, and about donors, and about how much fuss a small public room is worth. You will need someone loud, and someone dull, and someone with a key who has finally remembered where she put it." She put the little Hargrave stamp on the table beside our ancient purple oval like a confession and an offering. "May I help?" I thought of the 14-year-old who packs returns on Tuesdays, the pensioner who pets pages, the teen volunteers who whisper secrets over catalogs, the scribe who misspelled holiness and had the courage not to fix it. "Yes," I said, "but we do it my way, out loud, above board, no more rooms behind screens, no more quiet that breaks other quiet to feel powerful." "Agreed," she said. It should have ended there. It did not. The detective's radio spat static and a voice that sounded winded. "Unit at Meridian reports secondary breach at rear. Suspects fleeing across roof south toward the alley. One has what appears to be a box?" Nate swore so colorfully that Garrett said, "Language," on reflex. Rowan's face drained and then refilled with purpose. Eamon turned toward the door like a tide turning. I closed the hood over the hours with hands that shook and looked at the detective. I said, "Go! Take everyone. I'll secure this and wait. We will still be here." The detective shook his head. "Ma'am, with respect, nothing about tonight suggests I should leave you unattended again." "Then send half," I said. "Send Eamon."